When I first got my hands on a demo of Cyber Shadow at PAX East 2019, I was instantly smitten by how polished its old-school Ninja Gaiden-inspired gameplay felt, to say nothing of its smooth 8-bit aesthetics punctuating what seemed to be a futuristic, dystopian world inspired by gritty, moody settings like those seen in other NES classics like Batman, Shatterhand, and Journey to Silius. Considering how deeply impressed I was by that two-stage demo, imagine my surprise when I learned that Cyber Shadow had already been in development for years by a single person. Though you wouldn't know it from the name alone, Finnish indie developer Mechanical Head Studios is a literal one-man operation whose sole member is Arne Mechaskull Hunziker, director and designer of Cyber Shadow. It wasn't until several years into Cyber Shadow's development that the celebrated studio behind Shovel Knight, Yacht Club Games, approached Hunziker with a publishing offer to help bring the game to the finish line, thinking Cyber Shadow to be a strong fit for Yacht Club's brand identity and established pedigree. Now, after playing Cyber Shadow in its entirety for myself, all I can say is this: Yacht Club doesn't just know how to make them, they know how to pick them too. Retro-styled, nostalgia-soaked 2D action platformers are a dime a dozen these days, sure, but they're not all created equal, and Cyber Shadow manages to stand out from the crowd in much the same way Shovel Knight did, even if it does come up a little short in certain areas. For example, despite an interesting synthetics hunting humans premise and a memorably moody atmosphere accompanying the game's dystopian, tech-noir setting of Mecha City, Cyber Shadow underdelivers in the narrative department with a disjointed, mostly forgettable story and unremarkable characters. The story wraps up nicely enough by the time the credits roll, which I appreciate, but it just didn't make me feel much of anything. The Ninja Gaiden-style cutscenes do make for an enjoyably charming touch though, even if the art in some of them is a bit clumsy. Thankfully, a weak story and mostly one-note characters don't really take much away from Cyber Shadow because, like most games of its ilk, that is, retro 2D action platformers, the focus here is rightly on the pixel-perfect run-jump-and-slash gameplay, and it is here that Cyber Shadow excels. Taking control of the cybernetic ninja Shadow, players initially have a very narrow range of actions they can take, starting off with little more than a jump and a basic sword slash. This may sound limiting, but this breaking-in period is brief and serves an important purpose, allowing players to acclimate to the controls and physics before being thrown into the deep end of what can be a pretty tough game at times. Fortunately, Cyber Shadow is remarkably deliberate and well-paced in terms of the rate at which new moves and abilities are unlocked, and it feels like each one is introduced at just the right time. This keeps the game feeling fresh and exciting throughout, as it layers in new gameplay elements frequently but not too frequently as to be overwhelming. This deliberate pacing also emphasizes just how well designed Shadow's different abilities are and how well they complement one another. As Shadow's repertoire expands, it quickly becomes clear just how comfortably each new move fits in with the rest as you devise new ways to combine and string together different actions. And suffice to say, it's incredibly satisfying to figure this stuff out in the moment and feel your skill improving as you play. This satisfyingly measurable sense of skill-based progress also manifests in the game's numerous boss fights, which are generally fantastic and represent another jewel in Cyber Shadow's platforming crown. Some of the bosses can feel aggressively tough at first, but that's by design. You're not meant to brute force your way through them, and the fact that you generally can't is a feature, not a flaw. No matter how chaotic they may seem, each boss has movement and attack patterns that can be broken down and learned through old-fashioned observation and practice. Easily dispatching a boss that felt oppressively difficult not too long ago because you learned how to appropriately predict and react to its attacks provides a special rush that only the most well-designed bosses provide, and Cyber Shadow is full of them. I mentioned earlier that Cyber Shadow can be a pretty tough game, and it often is, but it rarely feels unfair. In a smart design choice, Cyber Shadow's old-school difficulty is balanced out by modern conveniences that mostly eliminate the overly punitive aspects of action platformers from the 8-bit era. For example, there's thankfully no live system, so dying merely sends Shadow back to the most recent checkpoint and you can simply keep trying until you get it right, learning each time you fail. But while each of Cyber Shadow's rather long stages contains multiple checkpoints, they're often spaced just far enough apart that dying still carries some appropriate weight as you're forced to retread old ground each time you kick the bucket. It's a tricky balance, and Cyber Shadow doesn't always get it right, with a few checkpoints in more difficult levels placed a little too far apart for their own good, but on the whole, any frustration I felt was kept to a relative minimum throughout. The smart, inspired level design and mostly excellent controls mean that any deaths you incur are usually your fault too, which helps prevent the game from feeling cheap and engenders a just one more time approach as you try again and, well, get good. Now, I said the controls are quote-unquote mostly excellent because there is an exception. A super fun dash move you gain later on in the game is unfortunately hampered by slightly inconsistent execution due to one of its two possible input commands feeling kind of finicky. This proved to be somewhat annoying in situations where I wanted to dash on a moment's notice only for the inputs not to register, but to be clear, dashing works as intended far more often than it doesn't, and all told, this is a pretty minor complaint. While the absence of a live system and mostly well-placed checkpoints already go a long way toward balancing out the game's difficulty, there are other ways to turn the tide even further in your favor. For example, defeated enemies and destroyed objects frequently drop yellow essence pickups, which can be collected and spent at checkpoints to upgrade them with features like health recovery and item spawns. These checkpoint upgrades are permanent too, so you'll enjoy their benefits every time you die and respawn, or otherwise pass that checkpoint again when replaying a level. Essence is pretty easy to come by too, so even if you're really struggling with a certain section, it won't be long before you can fully upgrade the checkpoint you keep getting sent back to and begin with advantages like full health, full special move powering spirit points, and even a fresh power-up item each time. Speaking of power-up items, Cyber Shadow offers a fun mix of offensive, defensive, and support tools to augment Shadow's innate skills. These range from pedestrian perks like a blade extension for your basic sword slash and a portable spirit point replenisher to fun, useful sub-weapons like the circularly rotating, momentum-based swag blade and the enemy shot-absorbing E-field. Now, these power-ups are temporary and will break after too much wear and tear, but they're a welcome presence that adds a fun additional wrinkle to the gameplay without ever becoming too overbearing. Aside from these short-lived perks, permanent upgrades for Shadow's health and spirit meter are hidden in each level for players willing to put in the time and effort to track them down. You won't be able to snag every hidden upgrade on your first time through each level either. So while Cyber Shadow is mostly linear and certainly not a Metroidvania in disguise like, say, The Messenger, there is definitely incentive to revisit earlier levels to open up new pathways and see what you can find with the new skills at your disposal. That said, I finished my first playthrough with 100% completion in a little under 8 hours, and replaying levels to find missed upgrades only accounted for 2 of those hours at most, so Cyber Shadow is a somewhat bite-sized experience no matter how you slice it. Now, that's not a criticism, mind you. I found Cyber Shadow's length to be just right for the experience it offers. Still, those who look for lengthy campaigns and lots of incentivized replay value in their games should know that Cyber Shadow offers neither. Once you finish the game with 100% completion, there's not much to do except go back and try to complete each in-game achievement. But as far as I've been able to tell, these achievements are just for bragging rights and there are no in-game rewards tied to them. Again, I personally take no issue with Cyber Shadow's relatively brief length and lack of post-game unlocks, but I can see where these might be sticking points for some. Speaking of sticking points that will bother some folks, but certainly not everyone, there is absolutely no rumble or force feedback of any kind in Cyber Shadow, at least on PlayStation 5. Now, it's not like I was expecting wholesale DualSense support or anything, but I happen to feel that even a touch of well-designed force feedback can go a long way, so I was disappointed to find rumble entirely non-existent here. Still though, this is obviously a very slight complaint, all things considered. Now, it's a known fact that any great platformer, retro or otherwise, needs an awesome soundtrack to match, and Cyber Shadow absolutely knocks it out of the park on this front. Composed by the newcomer veteran duo of Enrique Martin and Jake Vert Kaufman, Cyber Shadow's soundtrack is absolutely packed with powerful, hard-driving Mega Man-style platforming anthems that are as catchy and earwormy as they are contemplative and dramatic. Suffice to say, fans of chip music and 8-bit video game soundtracks in general are in for a real treat here, and I say that as someone who falls squarely into both camps. But Cyber Shadow's music is more than just great on its own. It also goes a long way toward enhancing the game's moody aesthetics and really pulled me into the game's gritty dystopian world, especially when playing with headphones. Straight up, this is one of the first truly great soundtracks of 2021. Cyber Shadow also benefits from strong visual design across the board, with sharp, easily readable sprite designs for Shadow and his enemies, detailed backgrounds that help convey the world's scale from stage to stage, and smooth, polished pixel animation. Now, if retro 8-bit inspired graphics don't appeal to you for whatever reason, nothing here is likely to change your mind, but for those of us who can't get enough of this aesthetic, Cyber Shadow is a pleasure to behold throughout. While it's not perfect and it doesn't necessarily rewrite the rules of 2D action platforming, Cyber Shadow is a lovingly and thoughtfully crafted title that both lives up to the classics that inspired it and exceeds the lofty expectations I've had for it ever since that first demo at PAX East 2019. That it also just happens to be the brainchild of a one-person development team is absurdly impressive, and I can't wait to see what Mr. Hunziker does next. In the meantime though, one thing is certain. In Cyber Shadow, Yacht Club Games made an excellent choice for their maiden voyage into the world of publishing. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to Good Vibes Gaming, and ring that bell to be notified when we publish new content. And if you like what you see on our channel, please consider supporting us over at patreon.com/gvgaming so we can keep doing what we love and bring you more of the content you love. In the meantime, may the rest of your day be full of good vibes.